Hello, my name is Yuval Bloomberg. I lived, worked, and traveled in East Asian countries. If you have any interest in East Asia, East Asian cultures, East Asian countries like China, India, Japan, Thailand, and more, so you are in the right place. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any content that I'm uploading frequently. In this video, I'm going to discuss China and the world, and why the world is so afraid of China. And when I'm saying the world, I'm mainly referring to the Western world or to the Western powers or superpowers. In the mid-80s of the previous century, for those of you who are old enough, surely remember the movie Black Rain with Michael Douglas. The movie plot was about two policemen who were caught in the middle of internal fight in the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. The two policemen accompanied the gangsters they caught. They accompanied them back to Japan, and the story is about the engagement and the acquaintance with the Japanese culture, the deep differences between the American culture and the Japanese culture, and the culture of the Yakuza, the culture of the police. This was the plot. But the real story was about the fear of the hostile Japanese takeover of the US. At that time, Japan got very rich, and it looks like they bought everything in the US, so it was like Japan is taking over the US. So there was a great fear in the US from Japan and the Japanese. And the movie tells actually the story of that period of the mid-80s in the US. But our story today, our topic is about the fear from China, which is not like Japan, not at all, but still the fear was there with Japan. So trying to figure out today why the Western world is afraid of China. And definitely there are reasons for that. And I'm going to review now some of the main reasons as I see them for these fears. Usually people are afraid from people they don't know. Usually people are afraid from what they are not familiar with. We're always afraid from anything that is new to us, strange to us. This is our nature, nothing new about it. But still, you can take India, for example, and ask yourself, does the Western world afraid of India in the same way they are afraid of China? Indians are different, almost like the Chinese. They don't look the same, they have different culture, they have different food, they have different languages, they have dozens and dozens, they have hundreds of languages. Everything is different in India and in comparison with the Western world. So why the world is more afraid of China in comparison with India? So there are reasons for this, and I'm going to review these reasons. First reason is appearance. Chinese look very different. They don't look like Western people, and I think that when Western people coming across a lot of Chinese, he's confused. It takes time to see the differences between the people, because you used to what you use. You live with your own people, so you know the differences. You are like calibrated to see the differences, the smallest differences between the same people you are living with. But when you see a group of people that look different from you, you don't see these tiny differences, and at the beginning it looks like everyone looks the same for you. This is the feeling I had when I came first time to Taiwan, and this was like natural feeling. Of course, after some times you get quickly to see the differences between the people. You see all the differences, and you don't understand how you thought at the beginning that they all look the same. But this is how you start to feel when you see first time. Actually, I remember that when I was sitting in the Kawasan Road in Thailand, about 1 year after I was living in Taiwan, and I was watching all the blonde guys from, I don't know, Australia, New Zealand, wherever they came from, walking on the Kawasan Street, and for me, suddenly they all looked the same. I was looking at them, it's like it was difficult to see the differences between all these guys, the blonde guys. So I think eventually it's a question of perspective. But this is a fact. For Western people, when they look first time on a lot of Chinese, they look for them the same. And when you cannot tell the differences, and when you cannot differentiate between people, when you cannot see the individual, so it create distance. It leads to alienation, to fear, and to distance. And of course, this is a first reason. I'm not saying it's the most important reason, but this is a reason that creates this kind of, that start to build the fear. Second reason is the language. If you're a Western guy that's traveling across Europe, or you're traveling across the US, or you're traveling across South America, so most likely is that the language that you hear are languages that come from Latin language, meaning like you can grab words even if you are not speaking the language. And even if you cannot grab any word, you can understand the letters. I'm not talking now about Russian, but I'm talking now about German, French, England for sure, and definitely in Spain and South America. All these kind of countries, they are using Latin letters. So even if you cannot grab even one word, you still can understand something with the writing. You can grab words from the writing, so you can understand what is saying on the big signs in the streets, on the roads. You can read it. So it creates like a feeling of proximity. You feel like you know something, it's familiar to you, it's not completely far from you. But when we are coming to talk about the Chinese language, it's so different. They are using a lot of pronunciation that is completely different from the English, from the Western languages, completely differences. I'm not talking only about the words, I'm talking about the pronunciation. Western guy that trying to pronounce the words or the letters that Chinese speak, it's very difficult to do it because we were not used to do it from the beginning when we were babies. So first of all, very difficult to understand the language, and even if you start to learn the language, it's very difficult to understand it because it takes a lot of time to differentiate between the different tones. And that, if you don't know, or if you know, the Mandarin, which is the main language in China, contains 4 main tones. There are other languages in China that contain even 7 tones, and you can have the same word in different tones, and in each tone the meaning is completely different. So it takes a lot of time. Even if you speak Chinese or you learn Chinese, it takes a lot of time to get what they are saying. And I'm speaking now as someone who tried to learn Chinese for years. I can speak some, but it's very, very difficult even to be understood when you are talking, because the way we are pronouncing the words are different than the way the Chinese are used to hear. And in many cases, even if you think you speak Chinese, they do not understand you. And now, so you don't only do not understand anything from the language, so now it's the writing is completely different because you cannot read anything on the signs, it's like Chinese characters. So it's created again the alienation, it created distance, it created which lead to feel the fear because it's all strange to you, you cannot get into it, you cannot understand it. So this is something else which create the distance with Chinese people. The third thing is the culture. And again, I'm going back to the example, if you are a foreigner, if you're a Western guy that's traveling along in Europe or traveling in South America or traveling in the US. So Western culture, even if you are an atheist, complete atheist, you do not believe in anything, still your roots are from Christianity. You have orientation to Christianity, whether it's Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Baptist, Evangelist, whatever kind of Christianity you came from, you have orientation to it and to the habit and to the customs of this religion. Chinese culture is completely different. They do not have any orientation to this to the customs of Christianity, to the holidays of Christianity, though they are celebrating the New Year. They're celebrating the New Year because they like it, because it's a lot of fun, it's a reason for celebration. But the real culture, Chinese culture, it's about complete different history, which started thousands of years ago in China. The ethos are completely different and going back to complete different stories. When Western guy approach Chinese, or when he get to China, he will not see the same. He will not feel at home like he would have felt if he's coming visiting in a Christian country. Though I'm aware, of course, most of the Western countries are not Christian at all, but still they have orientation to Christianity. So this again, it's another thing, another major thing that create alienation, create distance, which naturally lead to fear. Small fear, not so big, but it's accumulating because it's the language, it's the appearance, it's the culture. And the next thing is Chinese etiquette. So if you are traveling to China, or if you are working in China, you will notice very shortly that the etiquette in China is very different than the etiquette in you will notice very shortly that the etiquette in China is different than the etiquette in Western countries. The customs are different, and things that important in some cases, I'm not saying everything, but it's different. So if you won't be able to figure out the important things of the Chinese etiquette, you have good chance. I'm not saying it will fail you, but you have a good chance to miss the point and to fail in your mission. We'll give just one example. Let's say that you are a businessman that's traveling in China and do not understand the importance of what called guanxi. Guanxi means like the communication network, and you are trying to get directly to business. This is how you would have done if you are doing business in Europe, but this is not the same if you are doing business in China. So this is where you can miss badly the Chinese etiquette and to fail, because in China it's very, very important, really important, to create first the personal connection, to drink together, to eat together, to share this kind of experience together, and then on this level you can build the business goal, the business purpose that you have. It's very different than how it works in America or in Europe. So this is another thing that keep you distance from the Chinese, because if you do not understand it, you always be in position like, what's going on? I do not understand them. I do not understand how do I have to behave with them. So this is another layer of alienation and distance, which lead naturally to fear. Next is cuisine. If you didn't travel to China, so I can assume that you tried the Chinese food where you live. Maybe it's like a converted Chinese food. I don't know if this is original Chinese food, though original Chinese food can be found today in all the big cities, in Chinatown or in real Chinese restaurants. But once you are not familiar with the food, or you are not regular to the food, this again creates sort of alienation and distance. And in China, it's very easy to get to this situation. Chinese food is, the diversity of Chinese food is immense. It's like endless number of dishes in different regions of China. Worse than that, when you're sitting in restaurant, in most restaurants, you will not be able to find the menu in English. You will find it, usually you'll find it in Chinese. I'm not saying in all, in the big cities, I guess it's easier to find in English, but not in the small towns. So again, you will not understand what you want to take, and usually you will be with someone who may help you, so you will need always to get some translator or someone who can speak English, be with you, and you will be completely dependent on him in order to understand what you want to eat. And even though you will not understand what you are going to get until you get it and try it. And the Chinese food is completely different in the way it's being made in comparison with Western countries. There are a lot of examples, and again, when you cannot eat freely, or when you are afraid of what you are going to get, or the smell is not like what you used to, and the smell in Chinese cuisine is different than the smell of Western cuisines, it's create alienation, it creates distance, and it leads to another layer of fear. Small fear, not something big, but notice that this is all accumulating all the time. But here, on top of the, I would call it regular, on top of the regular problem with the food, there are the stories with the dogs. It's famous that in the southern part of China they are eating dogs. So this kind of food, which cannot be perceived as food in Western countries, is being accepted very badly and create a lot of hard feelings in Western countries and with Western people. Western people, it's very, very difficult to accept dogs as food. But I can ask why, because I'm vegetarian, I'm not eating any kind of meat. But in terms of food, does the dog is better than the cow or than the sheep? I don't think so. If they have feelings, they have it in the same level. But still, I know I'm not trying to pretend I do not understand. I don't understand the difference. I have dog myself. It's very, very difficult for Westerners, even if they are meat eaters. It's very difficult for them. It's impossible for them to accept the fact that dogs are being used as food. And today, it's being propagated everywhere. You can see it everywhere. If you want to see it, you can see something like this. For me, I cannot see it, but you can see the cages with the whining dogs waiting to be slaughtered. I think this is something that causes a lot of hard feeling, and I would say even hate toward China and toward the customs, the food custom in China. So this is something which is definitely very difficult for people to accept. No one wanted to accept it, though people understand that there is no real difference between cow and a dog. But still it creates a lot of a hard feeling, and I would say in this case fear as well. The next one is Chinese economy growth. The beginning of the 90s of the previous century, actually no country were really troubled by China. China was just starting to grow. I don't know if you know, but China and India dominate the GDP, the worldwide GDP, until the mid-19th century. Since then, there was degradation for both of the countries, and the new growth started just recently, 20-30 years ago. So at the beginning of the 90s, no country was troubled by China. No one really cared, because China, just came out from the regime of Mao Zedong, and the country was really in a deep mud in terms of economy situation. Very poor country, though it was huge country and the potential was clear, but the power was not fulfilled, and the economy potential was not fulfilled yet, but was just started. So China did a relatively a quick journey in the last almost 30 years, and grew its economy. At the beginning, it was like a big workshop for the Western countries, but China didn't plan to remain the main workshop of the Western countries, and they made progress all along. They made progress all the time. So today, for example, a lot of the workshop that used to be in China moved to other countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and other countries that pay lower salaries. China still have a lot of workshop like this, but this is definitely not the main goal of the country to become the workshop of the world. They want China has a much more ambitious plan. China didn't limit itself to the laws of the Western countries. They use anything they can for some time to get technologies that enable China to develop its industry. It raised a lot of rage and anger in Western countries, especially in the US. they all tried to avoid China from achieving this technology in the ways China tried to achieve it. It definitely contributed to the hard feeling towards China. The economy growth translated quickly into military growth and into influence, of course. So China started to gain a lot of cash and invested it back in other countries, poor countries in Africa and South America in order to assure the resources it needs. So China bought a lot of mines in Africa. And again, this started to create the sense that China is taking over the world, at least the weak part of the world, while China ambition was to assure that it's going to get all the resources it needs in order to assure the continuation of its economic growth. China accumulated a lot of cash and invested a lot of money in its army, to grow its army and to fulfill its goals in areas which are close to China. So other two major parts which related to the Chinese economic growth can be noticed in two specific projects. The first one called AIIB. This is a parallel bank to the World Bank. China gathered together with about, I think, 50 countries and established a parallel to the World Bank and started to give loans to countries that need the loans. The differences is China created a different system. They are not using the same restriction as the World Bank. They are not asking reforms from countries that are giving the loans. And they are much easier in this regards rather than the World Bank, which represent the Western powers, which in many cases enforce reforms and conditions for countries that want to use its money. So this was the first project, and the second project was the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Belt and Road Initiative, probably the biggest project ever in the human history, is trying to establish the old Silk Road in two ways. One is a maritime way, and the second one is going through the land. And this project is really, really huge. The assessments are different, but it can reach easily to $1 trillion. And a lot of countries are involved. China investing a lot of money in building infrastructures in the sea and inside the mainlands of different countries, like railways and harbors, airports, a lot of things. And the goal eventually is to create, to facilitate infrastructure that enabling very quick transition of goods from China all around Asia and Europe. So imagine if you are ordering anything from AliExpress and it takes you 3-4 weeks, maybe tomorrow or in 2-3 years it will take you only 2 days to get it, because there are a lot of railways, a lot of new infrastructure will enable quick transition of the goods. So this is something which raised a lot of fear in Japan, in India, because it looks like, again, China is trying to take over, and China is trying to take over the world economy, to gain advantage with the ability to transit goods in a faster way, in a cheap way. So definitely it will give a good advantage for the Chinese industry. So China, India and Japan trying to facilitate their own Silk Road. There is a plan for this as well. But this create again a fear from China, because it gives the feeling like China is trying to take over with huge project that they can finance with the cash that they have today. Now, this is not the end of the story, because there is a case with Sri Lanka. This is, for example, an example of how things are really working. Sri Lanka is a poor country, and they are still part of this project, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Sri Lanka took a loan from China to build the harbor that we'll use for the, again, will be part of this infrastructure of the new Silk Road, the maritime Silk Road, and they could not pay the bill. They couldn't pay back to China. So China told them simply, okay, you cannot pay the bill, no problem, but instead of this, just lease us the harbor for 99 years. So Sri Lanka, which is like the backyard of India, leased the harbor to China for many years. And now China has a presence very, very close to India shore. This is something that definitely creates a lot of fear and anger in India, but not only in India, but in other countries which see that China is giving loans to countries that cannot pay back, but instead of this, China is leasing from them the area or the project that was financed with this money. So this is definitely one more reason why the Western world is afraid of China. But is there really a reason to be afraid of China because of this project, the Belt and Road Initiative? Honestly, I don't think so, because hundreds of millions of people, or maybe I should say even more than that, maybe billions of people, because a lot of people are living in this area, will enjoy this new infrastructure. First of all, it creates a lot of jobs in this area because these projects require a lot of establishment works and definitely need a lot of workforce. But beside of this, it will help all the industries that will be along the way. Just imagine that you are having a shop, that you are having a business, and it's very close to a central area, and you can transit your goods very easily to other places. So it's not only China that will enjoy this infrastructure, but all the countries that establishing and building this infrastructure will be able to use it and will enjoy it. So I think just imagine if this project was done by a Western superpower, I'm sure you will think, well, what a great opportunity, and surely it will be great for humankind, and it will help a lot of economics. But when China is doing it, people do not take it for granted. So there is more like fear, what China is up to, what they're trying to do, they are going to take over the world. But in this case, China is less trying to take over, and they have it's really the strategy not to enforce countries that using or getting the loans, not enforcing them for any reform or for any commitment, except of course paying the bills. So of course there is a negative side to this, because you say, okay, they don't care whom they are giving the money to, and they are encouraging dictatorships. But on the other side, they are helping a lot of people by this. So they are creating a lot of income, a lot of jobs for a lot of people in this area of Asia and Europe. Another reason is China expansion and China ambition in the South China Sea. Now it's quite famous what's going on there. China is taking over the South China Sea. First they phrased it in their law about 20-30 years ago, and since then China is like taking over slowly. It started with small building works, and it continued with massive infrastructure on reefs and on different islands, islands group on the South China Sea. Now China here ignoring claims that being done by other countries that are located on the shores of the South China Sea, like Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, Taiwan for sure, and they do not consider their claims. Actually, Philippines tried to sue, they didn't try, they sued China in the International Court in Hague. China lost, but completely ignored the ruling of the judge there, and continue with its activities in South China Sea. This is like real, this issue has a real explosive potential. The only country today that's challenging the Chinese army in South China Sea, it's the United States. They are sending constant patrols in areas that being claimed by China as their territory. You can see more videos for this in YouTube. And the US is doing this, is then China is trying to warn the US. They still didn't do anything which can lead to war, but this is like explosive area and it can definitely deteriorate it. Personally, I don't think China is going to launch a war, and I'm going to do another video only on this topic. If China is going to launch a war against the US over the because of the crisis in the South China Sea. But I'll just give you in a nutshell my answer to this question. I don't think it's going to happen, but still this create a fear, and this create a lot of anger and rage against China, and it would look like one-side actions without considering the claims from neighboring countries. On top of the South China Sea, everyone familiar with China and Taiwan. And I used to live in Taiwan, and I remember I was waking up to the news. China threats to shoot missiles on Taiwan if they dare to claim to announce independence. And it's going on back and forth all the time. Anything never happened, but always the warning up in the air. Still, Taiwan economy very dependent on China. I think the number is like 30% GDP of Taiwan GDP is coming from China. A lot of students, Taiwanese students studying in China, and the connection is very, very strong. Now, in these cases, usually the Western perspective is very superficial. Who is the strong? Who is the weak? So the weak is right, the strong is mistaken. Now, in life, it's not only like this. The weak can be wrong as well. Now, I don't want to get in between China and Taiwan and say and give my judge. I'm no one in this regard. I have my own opinion, and everyone can have his own opinion. If you read history, Taiwan was never separated as a separated country from China. Taiwan, and if you go, I don't know, I know I like Taiwan. I like Taiwan a lot. I like Taiwanese people a lot. I have a lot of experience in Taiwan. I really, really appreciate this country. But if you live in Taiwan and if you go to China, there are differences, but it's the same culture eventually. They're speaking the same language. They're sharing the same history, sharing the same ethos. They share the same religions. It's the same, with differences. Like you have differences between South China to North China. So there is difference, of course, with Taiwan as well. But in general, it's looked the same. And the history showed, and these are facts, Taiwan was not independent. It's like it was never like another China. So in this regards, it's recreate again a fear, it create anger, it create rage, because people judging China over this, and like why they are claiming Taiwan, maybe they are big enough, they should not, and people always have some fear from China. So in this regard, it's like it's almost convenient to blame China over Taiwan. One more thing, it's the governmental system. So it's not secret, China is a dictatorship. It's being controlled by one party. There is no political freedom in China, and everyone in the West remember Tiananmen Square events, and this is something that it's in the mind of many people in the Western world. I mean, China is being perceived as like cruel regime that will not hesitate to use any force needed in order to maintain their power. Now, this is true in terms of political freedom. China is being controlled by one party, the Communist Party, which are not so communist today. If you travel to China, if you are in a business trip, if you are a tourist and you travel to China and you get to discussion with people, you hang around with people. Of course, no one will start to speak with you when you are on the bus or if you are with people who speak only Chinese. But I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people that speak English. It was mainly during business trips, and I never got a feeling that they are living in a fear. I never got a feeling that they are living under like terror regime. They were pretty free. They talked with me about politics and other sensitive topics, which I didn't expect. Actually, 10 years ago, no one dared to speak about any political topic. Today, they are daring, speaking about it. They didn't criticize the Communist Party or didn't say anything about it. It was more like general politics, but I didn't have the feeling that they are afraid of anything. Of course, I'm not pretending to be in a position that I saw everything and I understand everything. Definitely, they have limitation for sure because this country is being controlled by one party. But still, they were not afraid to discuss political topics and to discuss about other topics and to hear my opinion about China and to hear what I think the future of China or how China and the US will work together. So in this regard, I think people perceive China worse than it really is. So it's correct. There is one party regime, but the situation for the people there, it's not so bad. I mean, they are living quite well. Most of them focusing in the economy, in their building the business, in their work, in their life. So this is how things are going on there. But when you are in the West, you do not see it usually. But what you do see, it's the criticism, in many cases justified criticism about the Chinese regime, and this is the only thing you have in your mind. You do not see the other sides of it. You do not see the life, and you do not get to know the people who live the life and the way if they are fear or not. But if you are a Western, you will get the fear from China over this topic. Another thing is everyone knows that YouTube, Google, Facebook are all banned in China. They are not allowed. China want to control all the stream of knowledge, all the stream of information. They do have their own substitutions for this. If you know WeChat, you know Baidu, you know other platforms that's replacing Google, replacing Facebook, replacing WhatsApp. So still, the lack of this main huge platform that everyone in the West is used to them in China create fear because of this. Though my personal experience, you can have it if you are using your own phone with your own foreign SIM. You can have it. You won't be able to get to it if you are using wireless in the hotel or in other places because then it's blocked. But again, this is something that creates fear from China, the feeling that they are controlling everything, they are monitoring everything. But let me share a secret with you. They are not the only one who controlling anything and monitoring all the information that's running on the internet. So I shared with you most of the reason why people are afraid of China. But eventually, if I conclude everything together, and comparing visits in the US, visits in Europe, visits in China. For me, this is personal, but this is me. I will always prefer to visit in China. I never felt any fear when I was there. Actually, it's the opposite. The personal safety is much more stronger in China in comparison to any Western country. If you're traveling in China, you feel completely safe. And I'm not considering the situation which I have to judge everything based on my own values, on the values that I grew on. There are other societies which live on different values, which are not always identical to what we have. Now, China, in terms of fear, again, I think that this is really a great country to visit, to stay in. I never got any sense of fear from the people who live in China. So most of the reason that cause fear to people are reasons that coming from distance, cultural differences, and reasons that coming from what the people see in the news. Now, we don't have any control on the news, just I can tell you that news always focusing on a very narrow angle of things. You never get the whole picture. Life always more complicated, and there is always much more than you see in the news. And when I have to judge everything based on my own experience, I really do not see the need to fear from China. I do consider China, though it's a very ambitious country, though they have plans, though they want to be the biggest superpower, though they want to be everything, still, China is not a country that looking for a war. I don't think so. And at least not from, look at the origin of China, look how many wars China ever initiated in its history, not talking about internal wars in China, I'm talking in external wars with other country. If you look on this data, you will see that China is actually, you will be able to consider China as a peaceful country. So I really do not think there is a reason to be afraid of China. Though there is a place to criticize China over different things. And let's make separation between these two things.